Hey Denchbags, what's going on? It's Landon Remixes here, and welcome to my review of the second studio EP from Puppet. This one is called Fear is Fleeting. From his humble beginnings, Puppet has always focused heavily on collaboration. He wasn't even alone in his Monstercat debut, Scribble, which featured Eden, who was then known as the Eden Project. Between his debut single and his debut EP, Softspoken, Puppet focused heavily on pushing out a unique brand of electro house music, something that I didn't really get into at first, but by the time Answers featuring Coup rolled around, I was especially into it, and as you guys know, I really love The Fire, which was his second collaboration with the Eden Project that actually featured in my top 10 Eden songs video, which it was just a beautiful song with a lot of great hooks, great melodies, just something I could really get down to. But it was after that point that Puppet kind of started to change styles and gear up toward his debut EP. First he teased Without Me, which was a huge electro track but completely lacked a drop, which made for a stellar intro to the EP. Then he gave us Enough Is Enough with Richard Caddick and Cormac, which went into more of an indie dance sound. And then he gave us the absolutely surprise collaboration with Pierce Fulton, Boy and the Beast, which was just probably the most experimental work they had ever done. I remembered I had seen Pierce Fulton on a live stream perform that song with a mashup of Lean On, I think it was, by DJ Snake and Major Lazer, and that was just so surprising to hear those sounds coming through. And I didn't actually think they were going to end up releasing it on Monstercat, but they did, and I'm really happy they did. Just such a different kind of sound for Puppet and Pierce Fulton both at the same time. And if you guys don't remember, I gave my absolutely highest regards to Softspoken when I reviewed it very early this year. I think it was in January actually, so it's kind of funny that this is coming full tilt with another EP in December, less than a year later. But kind of looking back at it now, Softspoken seems to be a little bit more of an experiment, and it didn't have a whole lot of cohesiveness in it. He was throwing in electro tracks, he was throwing in indie dance tracks, all these different kind of sounding things, and didn't really seem like he knew what kind of direction he was going. But with this EP, it makes a lot more sense looking back on it. In fact, listening back on it now, Softspoken seems much less like a debut EP and more like a transitional piece from Puppet's first singles to what he's making now. And that is kind of something that really this EP is centered toward. Puppet has seemed to finally found a niche in indie dance music. I think I criticized this a little in my top 5 for Monstercat 029 Havoc. I talked about how Puppet's newer tunes seem to all kind of be VIP versions of Enough Is Enough. That's just how I felt at the time. But now kind of looking back at it, it seems like that was done on purpose because this seems to be the new style that Puppet is going for in a general sound rather than trying to repeat the success of that song. It's just what he's making now, rather than the kind of classic Puppet electro sounds that he was making and that pushed forward onto Softspoken. And that is heavily evidenced by the fact that there are just as many Enough Is Enough sounding indie dance tracks on this EP as there were Scribble sounding tracks on the Softspoken EP, which is 3 out of 6, meaning half of the tracks on the EP, and the rest are kind of experimental, leading me to think that if Puppet continues in this pattern, we might get something really interesting with his next EP, or maybe even an album. Because to be real, the outliers on this EP are probably even more experimental than they were on the last one. Before I go too heavily into praising this EP though, I am going to get my picks with it out of the way, and they are pretty minimal to be honest, but I still have to talk about them of course. First of all, as much as I love Listen to the Storm, I just can't get into it quite as much as I did with Without Me from the Softspoken EP, and of course that's like me to say considering I'm such a big fan of house music, and I did love Puppet's electro house style after I really got into it, so it's just like me to say something like that. But I just really don't love the repetitive guitar licks that go on in the song for a solid couple minutes, probably just a little too repetitive. It's not necessarily that the song is even bad, it's just that it's not as good as Without Me, which makes me kind of think less of it as an intro compared to the Softspoken EP. And maybe it's just that it's missing that something that I feel like Telepathics and Eden brought to that track. I just thought the vocals were so powerful, especially on Telepathics' part. And don't think at all with this that I'm trying to pick on this EP for having a strong lack of Eden, which of course it is a little disappointing from a fan standpoint, but from a friend standpoint, I know exactly what is going on with Eden's life. He's been crazy busy this year pumping out his I Think You Think Too Much of Me EP, and he's been on an absolutely insane tour, so I did not expect him to have a feature on this EP at all. I didn't even realize that he didn't have a feature on it until I was like, oh yeah, there's no Eden on this thing, and I had to think about it to myself. It's a little bit odd, but I completely understand. Secondly, I kind of feel like To Be Alive was thrown on this thing just to be a track. I don't mean to completely assume anything, but if I know Monstercat and how they work, I know that a lot of times people will send them instrumentals and then they'll assign a vocalist to it, which is what happened with Vice Tone's Nevada that released earlier this year, that when they threw Cozy Zuzeldorf, or however you pronounce that name, I still have no idea how that thing is pronounced. They put her on that track as a result of Vice Tone sending in that demo, and I feel like it's probably the same case here because I can't picture Puppet approaching Aaron Richards about being on a track, especially when Aaron's been kind of assigned to other tracks this year. I could be wrong about that, but just because of that thought, for me, the vocals seem really disconnected from the instrumental, although I think it did end up making a really solid body of work in the end, something that I can definitely enjoy, although that's always going to be in the back of my mind, no matter what. And finally, although I love Just You for being so different from the rest of the tracks, I just can't stand how bland the lyrics are on this thing. It's the same two lines over and over again, and obviously they did this to kind of be cheesy, but there's a point where you can get cheesy. Like, for example, how I would compare this song is like to the old days of Owl City. I was a big fan of his Ocean Eyes album. A lot of his stuff was heavy, like acoustic and electronic based, and that's kind of where this track is going for, except the lyrics are nowhere near as creative as they were on that album. And that's really about it when it comes to terms of negatives. I really did love a lot of things about this EP. Although, like I said, I did love Puppet's electro sound a lot. A lot of people were getting very tired to a point of hearing that same sound over and over again, to a point where everyone said the first three Puppet singles, of course, Scribble, Answers, and The Fire, all sounded exactly the same, and then when he put out the Softspoken EP, he showed everyone that he can go outside of that vein, but didn't really do it completely until this EP came out, where he's gone fully indie dance. Although that style is repeated so much throughout this EP, I definitely don't think it's a bad thing, and I can definitely say that I'm probably drawing comparisons where I don't really need to, considering the only tracks that really sound a lot like Enough Is Enough is I'm Here and Killing Giants, which both feature Richard Caddick, and obviously he was on Enough Is Enough as well, so of course there is going to be a little bit of conclusion drawing there in my mind, just because it's the same voice that's on both of those tracks. And there's absolutely no reason to come to conclusions that Puppet is being lazy with this EP, because I think in terms of production, this is probably his strongest release yet. In fact, this new EP has a lot more of Puppet than we've ever seen before. For the first time ever, we actually get Puppet's own voice on I'm Here, and then we also get it in vocoder form on Play Pretend. And then I'm not actually sure if it's him or Pierce Fulton that are singing on their collaboration, but I did assume it was Pierce Fulton, considering it heavily mimics the sounds of Borrowed Lives from Pierce Fulton's last EP. And I'm actually really excited they released a track in the indie pop vein, even if it does heavily mimic the styles that Pierce was going for on his last EP on Seeking Blue. It's super cool to see Monstercat putting out something like this, and especially something that's going to make it onto their next compilation album, which I'm really excited about. Of course, Richard Caddick had a huge influence on this EP, but I definitely don't think that's a bad thing. He's probably one of my favorite up-and-comers on Monstercat. I wish he'd release more originals, more remixes and things like that, especially after he blew me away with his Aruna What If remix earlier this year. I'd really love to see Richard Caddick push out an EP or even an album next year. That would be crazy. That would make me so happy. Considering Richard Caddick is probably the artist that's filling my 2009 Owl City void that's been left there ever since he started going more in the pop direction. But probably the biggest moment on this EP comes in the form of Play Pretend. He actually talks about some really deep things in the lyrical department, one of which I thought was referring to terrorism, but he definitely made sure to correct me on that before I put out this video review. Turns out I was wrong. It's probably time to start slowing down on the amount of lyrics that I've been reading up on in Genius, because that can screw with your mind for sure. But honestly, just a really cool song to get through, and honestly, this might be my mind's substitute for the lack of Eden on this EP, just because Eden's done stuff in this vein before, not with those same type of plucks and pads in the background that Puppet has used, but he has used that same vocoder style in the past before. But the main thing to take away from this EP is that it's heavily fueled by those big indie dance hooks, and obviously if you're not really into those, you're probably not going to like this EP very much. I did like them though, and I think I like them even more than Enough Is Enough. I think they're a pretty big step up for the most part, with the exception of probably To Be Alive featuring Aaron Richards, which I've already talked about my opinions on that. But in terms of I'm Here and Killing Killing Giants, I think they're a big step up, especially on Killing Giants, which was, like I already mentioned, one of my top 5 in my review of 029 Havoc. Just so much noise and electro sounds, it's beautiful. In conclusion, I don't think this EP absolutely blows Softspoken out of the park, but I definitely think it's a step forward and a step up. Puppet's production has gotten a lot better, and I can definitely see him diversifying himself. Hopefully he won't be stuck in this indie dance vein for too long, or people are really gonna get tired of it, I'm guessing. But because that genre is so wide, I guess we'll just have to see where Puppet finds his niche next. I'd give this one a strong 8 to a light 8.5. As always, I have the Spotify link down in the description below if you guys want to listen to this EP for yourself. And if you like this EP or hated this EP, let me know what you think down in the comments section below. As always, I'm Landon Remixes. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.